Good morning. My name is Matt Garrett. I'm a commercial director working for a company called Dalkia Engineering. We deliver MEP, MEH technical services to a wide range of sectors, including infrastructure and building in UK construction industry. I thought I'd come along with some observations today on what I'm seeing in different parts of UK construction, focusing on areas of fragility and problems that I see, and some solutions. But to put it in context, look, the construction industry is an amazing industry. There's hundreds of brilliant people, like the people in front of me. It's given me an enjoyable career, and we produce amazing things on a day-by-day basis. But there are problems and there are fragilities. To put this talk in context, I spent 11 years working for Costain, mainly in big infrastructure programs and projects. And then 18 months ago, I joined as a director of Dalkia Engineering. And I'm back looking into a wider range of sectors, including building, health, defense, leisure, commercial, nuclear, energy. There's a wide range of sectors. So it's helped me to re-engage with the world of JCT, as well as NEC. And we're operating as Tier 1 and Tier 2, so the world of subcontracting is again upon me. So I'm going to look at, I'm going to share some things that I'm seeing, talking to the fragility of the industry and the participants in the industry. You can read the sort of topics I'm going to go down through, and hopefully finish on some positives and alternatives and how can we do things better. First of all, look, insolvencies are prevalent in UK construction. And what I think is interesting from this graph, the line at the bottom is civil engineering. Fairly consistent low levels of insolvencies. And I think this is predominantly the infrastructure sector. I would say predominantly delivered using NEC, option C, option E contracts or hybrid. And there is a much lower incidence of insolvency. What you're seeing in the yellow and red, the red line is general building and the yellow line is specialist contracting in building. And the blue line is the total. But as it says, over the last 5 years, the insolvencies have increased by over 50%. And the construction industry stands apart from other industries in the UK in this statistic. I thought what I'd do is try and pick out some names of companies you will recognize. These are all companies with an annual turnover greater than 100 million that have gone since 2020, or become insolvent entity administration. There's some big names on there, names that have been in the industry for years or decades. Show of hands for anyone that's worked with at least one of those companies on that list? Yeah. And these are the big firms. As the graph shows, the specialist contractors had a higher rate of insolvency than the general contractors that I would put in this bracket. So, that's not a great thing. And I'm kind of creating a link here between the correlation between insolvencies and disputes. So, again, coming back from the King's College London report that was widely reported on last year, adjudication referrals are on the increase. And I don't know how clearly you can just about read those small things. So there's a real correlation here between the number of disputes that are being referred to adjudication nominated bodies and the level of insolvencies. It might be a coincidence, but maybe it isn't a coincidence. Just for amusement, really, some of the topics there, which were the leading causes of dispute. Inadequate contract admin, okay? Lack of competence of project participants, exaggerated claims, lack of professionalism of project participants. Well, it doesn't bode well, does it? I mean, hopefully the people in this room aren't involved in all these disputes. That would be bad. So yeah, there's a correlation here in my view. So what is actually going on here? Now, one of the jobs I have as commercial director is to steer the company on a path where we're going to be successful. We want to deliver a quality job. We want to deliver good outcomes. We do not want to get ourselves into problems that are inherent in the way the jobs are set up from the start. So here's a question, the risk-reward profile of contracts is not always sensible, okay? What happens if you continually trade under contracts where the risk profile outweighs the return? You're going to go down, aren't you? Look, the average profit margin of the top 100 construction companies in 24 was 1.7%. They had a better year in 23, 2.7%. Okay? Yet, we're continually asked to sign up to limits of liabilities in contracts for 100% or with no limit of liability. Delayed damages in main contracts only flow one direction, downhill, plus the contractor's direct costs. When I'm looking at a subcontract, the delayed damages are often in the range of 0.5 to 1% subcontract value per week. So our profit is gone in 1.5 weeks of a problem on a job. And that's just the delay damages aspect. So the risk and reward profile of contracts is something I feel is still needs addressing. And yeah. We also then have, on top of that, the drafting or amending of contracts to transfer risks down through the supply chain, removing grounds for EOT or compensation, which is a common trend, even in public sector. Cat Ferguson was good enough to put a hand up and say, yeah, we've taken out half the compensation events on Lower Thames Crossing. You're deemed to have priced it in competition. So, okay, I'm making a point here about the risk and reward profile of contracts. This is definitely an issue, and I'll come on to how do we navigate this as a contractor that wants to be here for the long term to deliver for all of our clients. Something else to mention, because the industry isn't getting easier for contractors, okay? So this is just one thing. I'm just mentioning it because it's part of the landscape that contractors, certainly those who've done residential in the past, are facing into. That, one of the things the Building Safety Act has brought in, this largely came as a result of the Grenfell disaster. But as you see on the left-hand side, it's amended the limitation period under the Defective Premises Act. So jobs that were completed or for which an action arose before June 2022 has now retrospectively got a 30-year limitation period. So we're now going back 30 years on claims against contractors for defective work. And I can assure you, any contractor that's done residential over that last 30 years is going to be seeing legal activity in this area. It's happening. Landlords are scared stiff, and they're doing surveys, and they're raking out problems. I'm sure you'll have seen some with your legal head. So it's not an easy environment. Why is it like this? Why are we seeing such problems? Why is the industry not more mature and creating better outcomes? And there's a bunch of things that I've come up with. These are my views on possible root causes. So, I'll pick a few out of this. I mean, the lack of investment, that, again, linked to low profitability. How can you invest in future capabilities, modern methods, when your profit margin is 1.7% and you've got hugely risky contracts on your books? And that link, and this links, I think David mentioned it, the skills and capability. Is the industry attracting the right people? Back to lack of investment in early careers and training. Fragmented supply chain. This is something, Dalkia is owned by EDF, as you know, rooted in France. And really interesting observations from my French colleagues on the UK construction industry, okay? What we mean by the fragmented supply chain, and I'll just take a comparator with France. In France, 25% of construction turnover is delivered by 3 big firms. That'd be Vinci, Eiffage, and Bouygues, yeah? In the UK, 25% of the turnover is delivered by 12 or 15 firms. And same for MEP. And how does that show up? So most of us will have got stories whereby you've been asked to bid a tender where you're one of 5. It's going to be cost-driven procurement, bad T's and C's, 4 contractors walk away, we're not touching it. There's always someone. There's always someone that will come along and do it. And maybe that's because they got an urgent need for a quick fix turnover. It solves another problem. It's a short term. But that fragmented supply chain stops the industry pushing back, stops the contracting industry pushing back as easily as it would if it was less fragmented. Yeah. And of course, we look at politics and economics. I think it was Kat mentioned 5 prime ministers, 6 chancellors. The lack of continuity or reliable long-term investment doesn't make it easy to plan. Public sector client behaviour. I have to say, I've worked in infrastructure because you can't qualify your bid on T's and C's in a public sector procurement process. It's a tick box of accept or no, and you're out. And I feel that does get abused. Or in fact, the pressures being put on departments by Treasury makes them want to shed risk and not hold the risk. They can't manage those risks. And there is no massive take-up in compliance with the construction playbook. Don't think there is. I think there's limited, but it's not very convincing. So, and then I'll finally go on to a little bit of lawyer bashing. The English legal system, okay? So again, back to the French. French law, I'm told, has an overriding principle of good faith. So when a case goes to court or dispute, there's an element of fairness comes in, I'm going to say. Might be a little bit wrong terminology, but there's a feeling that it's not just the black letter of the contract gets enforced. Whereas in the UK, the black letter of the contract gets enforced. And I feel that then creates a fight at the front end for the black letter to be in your favour or the other favour, and it creates a fight at the end when those black letters are enforced, even if they are completely unreasonable and unfair. Anyway, there's my list of root causes, potentially. Right, so I did say I was going to come up with some solutions. Just check how I'm doing on time. Okay, how to avoid getting into big trouble. So as a contractor, I'm talking to other contractors who've lost big money, and nearly all of them are talking now about being selective. Okay, yeah. They're all talking about being selective, and the big contractors who have managed to avoid big losses have already been being selective. And there's two or three ways you could do this. And first of all, be strategic. One thing that Dalkia has done, we've looked historically at our financial results in different sectors. And what it will tell you is, it will tell you the areas where you add value, where you differentiate, and where you have capability. Whereas the ones where you're competing on price, you may be not very good, and it all goes wrong. So we've identified the sectors in which we've historically done well, we think we add value, and there's a bit of technical complexity that we can differentiate ourselves. But also there's a whole load of other criteria to be selective around. And this was something that was drummed into me in early days in a family business when I worked for NG Bailey. Sales is vanity, profit is sanity, cash is king. Chasing turnover, competing on price to win more and more work, probably the start of the end. So, being selective, I'll just run through a bunch of things that we look at when we're faced with it, we're presented with a potential tender inquiry. You know, the relationships you've got with people and your client organizations is absolutely key. the capability and strength of those client or contractor organizations. Are they going to make a success of it? If they haven't got a good team, and we don't know them very well, it's starting to look a little bit unattractive, I'd say. And have we got a team available of the right strength at the right time to make a success of it? So people's key. The technical question, we have stronger and stronger technical teams by necessity, and they're engaged at the very front end. As we all know, it's not what's shown on the drawings, it's what's not shown on the drawings. Combine that with the words in the contract, and who holds the risk, and what is the quality of that design. Huge amount of work goes in at the front end to make sure this job is set up for success technically. And that also links to program. Does the client team or the contractors team understand how to build this job? Geographical location. Some areas are harder to deliver in than others. If you haven't got a team, you haven't got a supply chain, and it's a remote location, it's a risk factor. Yeah. Of course, financial, client and contractor financial strength. Is the project budget realistic? Is there a whole massive VE exercise to be done before getting this job in budget? Is going to cause chaos, technical weaknesses, half of it can never be realized, and the timing of the project will fit with a business plan. Finally, but not least, the procurement method. Is it a competition based on cost? Are we going ECI, negotiated? And of course, is it just a massive exercise in risk transfer? So there's so many reasons why you need to be eyes wide open before taking on a job. This is what I translate in being selective. It's all about, is the project set up for success, or is it a contract of conflict from the outset? Yeah. Okay. So my next topic is, because I still, things will always go wrong. There will always be challenges. There will always be problems. I just feel that it's now become even more expensive to get them sorted, which is another burden, problem, weakness in the industry. This is a little typo, actually. The extract I'm about to put up is actually from June 2020. Those of you who are old enough remember the Construction Act came into effect on the 1st of May 1998. So this was 2 years after the Construction Act and adjudication had become a thing in the UK. And it was reminding us that adjudication was introduced as a way of resolving construction disagreements quickly and efficiently. 28-day process. Yeah? And even then, in year 2000, the cost of adjudication was becoming a prime concern. I remember this is the days when you didn't even sometimes appoint a solicitor to run an adjudication. You hired an adjudicator, submitted them your papers, and they gave you an answer. The cost of adjudication was a concern at that point. And just to sort of bring this to life a little bit, this is the latest data on adjudication. You can see, the timescales for adjudication are now not often within 28 days. And the biggest reason for them being longer is the complexity of the case. Okay? And I'm thinking, what? Surely the disputes haven't become more complex. No. The parties are making it more complex by bringing in more stuff. Okay? And this is partly driven, well, I'll just give you an example. So, this is an example of a number of expert reports provided in a single adjudication, okay? With a referral. MC is a main contractor. I've taken names out. But with this adjudication referral came 4 separate expert witness reports. 2 delay experts, a technical expert, and a quantum expert, right? Not only that, 8 separate witness statements. And this is a process we're supposed to respond in 7 days. Okay. Now, what I would say is this whole use of experts, you kind of have to do it now because the adjudicator isn't going to open up the ASTA file or the Primavera file and work out the delay for themselves. And even on a quantum claim, the adjudicator doesn't really want to ferret through your spreadsheets. If the other party's appointed a quantum expert, the adjudicator quite likes that. It's like, they've said it's the right cost, they've said it's the right amount, I'll go with it. So yeah, if you don't respond in kind to the expert reports and all the witness statements, you're putting yourself at quite risk of having your case dismissed. So this is something adding a whole load of layers of cost to the industry. And in particular, disputes which include now a delay or an EOT dispute, I'm finding difficult to deal with. I'll talk about what happens now on a JCT. So there is a whole question around the method of assessment of extension of time. So you may or may not be familiar with the JCT extension of time provisions. But pretty much what it says is, as soon as you identify a relevant event, you notify the contractor. This is an extract from a subcontract. You notify the contractor and you give particulars of the expected effect at the time. So it has to be a prospective at this point, right? This is as the works are being built. Okay, so you've done your extension of time on a prospective. And you submit your final account within 2 months of practical completion, which means, by all intents and purposes, your final account is built on that prospective assessment of delay and the claim. So what happens then? The contractor disagrees with it. And within a few months after you've submitted your final account, they've wheeled out the SCL delay and disruption protocol, which says your method of extension of time assessment is all wrong. It's now very much clear from the SCL protocol that we should be doing a much more accurate way of assessing this is a retrospective as-built. Okay. Then you go to your delay expert. Yeah, I think, there's too much of a forecast element in a prospective. The most accurate and the one that will trump your prospective is a retrospective as-built. So, okay. So we've got to do it all again now. We've got to rebuild our extension of time because we're now time distant from the event, where at the time we built our extension of time, we were during the event. And all of this is adding cost, complexity, and difficulty getting this resolved. Okay? And that's just JCT. So, the next thing, the same situation on NEC. We have an advantage here because NEC has got stated set of rules and mechanism how you assess an EOT caused by a compensation event. And you use the accepted program and you measure the delay by looking at how far the planned completion is moved. Isn't that right, Glenn? Agree with that? So far, so good. Now, and the same for a key date. Yeah, so, this is really clear. We do our prospective. It's supported by the contract rules. Very clear. At least we won't be going back after the event and doing a retrospective. Good old NEC. Right. So, it's not as straightforward as that. There's a lot of people still think that when you're time distant from the event, you should go back and do an as-built retrospective. You can start to sort of wave them off. Yeah, you're wrong. But when there's so many of them, you start to worry. So this is a report, and I'm not singling out this publisher as being in any way, flawed, but because there's a lot of people who put these views forward. And this was a report I saw published, which makes a case for retrospective delay even on NEC. Okay, so I thought I'd engage constructively with that person. So I just made the point, I think the contract terms are binding, not optional. The assessment method is stated in the contract. I don't think you read it differently no matter what day or week you're reading it. But no, fairly defiant. It only applies when you're assessing it contemporaneously. If you're assessing it retrospectively, you assess it differently. And the reason I'm highlighting this is not to highlight the publisher. This is a commonly held view I hear. Okay, so how does that translate? So is that a problem or isn't that a problem? Well, it is a problem. Okay, so I get these arguments in adjudication. Okay, it's a risky run. You go with the NEC assessment method. Someone comes in with a retrospective. Okay, fine. And they quote the SCL protocol. But the introduction of the SCL protocol, I'm giving you some ammo now to fight back on this kind of philosophy. The introduction of the SCL protocol says it doesn't trump the contract. Of course it doesn't. It's not a contract document normally. The protocol must be considered against and give way to the contract which regulates the relationship between the project participants. Yeah? It makes it clear in the introduction. Don't refer to the SCL protocol if you've got a contract that contains a mechanism for assessment of delay. And this is an example of how you bat it back in an adjudication, just a set of words. The question of which methodology under the protocol is irrelevant. The only method is the one set out in the contract. So we're getting this. But why does this become a problem then? If I've got the right method, I'm confident I've got the right method. So there's a risk that if I completely just go with my prospective and stick to it, that the adjudicator, because there are so many people who think a retrospective will be more accurate after the event, if I don't address the retrospective and the adjudicator goes with the retrospective, I've got no alternative position. So I end up having to do enough work to support my prospective and do enough work to address the retrospective. So I'm doubling my work effort in any sort of negotiation or dispute. Because the question is, what if the adjudicator decides to consider the retrospective case for whatever reason? So, and all of this in the timescales of adjudication, okay? Right. So, particularly on delays, particularly on extensions of time, but any disputes have become more complicated. Disputes have become more expensive. It costs hundreds of thousands to participate in one of these complex adjudications like which I've described. And that's both parties spending that money. So what else can we do? So the NEC contains a concept of senior representatives, which is your first port of call if a problem arises. And I like this. And this is, in theory, two people who are not day-to-day involved in the job, meeting up, having a sensible conversation. And I like to think that if you get two sensible people who are informed enough and bright enough and independent enough, they should be able to find common ground. When two parties go to a dispute, it must be in the belief, both of them must be in the belief that they're right, which logically cannot be the case because they got different positions, right? So have the seniors fully understood their own case? Have the seniors listened and grasped the case against them? Listen like hell if you're in this situation, because you might be missing something massive, which is why you both think you're right when you're not. So communication and open minds are key. But I'd like to think that, and this comes back to this, having multi-layered relationships with your clients and contractors from the outset as one of your key selection criteria really helps. Project teams get themselves into difficulty, they can get entrenched. You do need those extra layers often to help sort it out and to be able to communicate what is going on between the parties. Why do both parties think they're right when they can't be? And something else I've engaged in the last 6 to 12 months, because it brought me back to the idea of how do we sort out disputes efficiently with less harm. You may have seen a lot of work being done by a group of volunteers, essentially, called the Conflict Avoidance Coalition. And the Conflict Avoidance Coalition is promoting various ways of resolving disputes early and inexpensively and with less collateral damage to everyone involved. They've come up with different ways in which you can do this. The best thing I heard at one of the conferences that was run was it's finding ways of identifying disputes when they're burning embers, not fires, and then senior people, when maybe with a bit of help from either a dispute board or an independent person called in, like a conciliator, an experienced person, not legally appointed. Maybe this was the original concept of adjudication. Bring a professional in who might just give you some advice, guidance, help you resolve your problem, but without spending £300,000 each, right? And without it, all getting very legal and nasty. So I would advise, NEC and RICS have published conflict avoidance procedures. The Conflict Avoidance Coalition has a website. It's got toolkits, but the whole idea really is, I quite like the idea of using the senior representatives for this. Maybe people that visit the site regularly who are not day-to-day, they can spot through KPIs or reports, things starting to go wrong. Maybe there's 3 programs not been accepted on the trot, and try and resolve these issues while they're burning embers, not raging fires. And let's try and stop spending all this money on experts and lawyers, if we can. Okay? Thank you very much. It's me done.